Sunday. Listening to a little Robert John. I don't think I can play too much, otherwise I'll get in trouble. But it is out on the Spotify playlist, so we're gonna go ahead and drop that down. Welcome back. It's Sunday night here in lovely Northern California. We've gone from heat wave to torrential rainstorm, thunderstorm, lightning storms, to muggy, hot, and now it is chilly cold, but it'll be warm here tonight. I'm going to change it up a little bit, so now that I'm starting to get a little more used to doing the podcast each week, and for the most part, I think we're going to lean more onto the audio side. Although if you are watching on YouTube Live, as always, I do have some pictures and slides and things to go along with the conversation tonight. But why don't we go ahead and get started? So I got 3 topics for tonight. I want to talk about dreams, and I want to talk a little bit about social media. And then both of these actually kind of come together to talk about legacy. And what I meant by is I wanted to change it up a little bit. The first 2 podcasts, I think, were more me just getting used to talking and sharing. But at the same time, I don't know there was really any kind of point to it other than, hey, look at this. Isn't this interesting? And if I'm going to take the time to do this each week, I wanted to make sure that there was kind of a point to it. And do I have actually something to say about these things? And I think I do. So why don't we get right into this week's first topic, which is dreams. And lately, at least for where I live, everything's still pretty well shut down. We're getting ready to start school remotely again. And spending a lot of time in the house. And for me, prior to COVID taking over our lives, my job involved almost weekly travel. So I was very used to being on the move, and if I was coming home on the weekends, there was always something to do. And as a result, I just kind of realized, like, wow, the past 10, 11, 12 years have gone by so quickly. And now that I have time to think about things, I started to kind of put some pieces together, and what I started to notice was I think all of my dreams have come true, but just maybe not in the order or at the time that I thought I wanted them or that I was wishing for them. So, for example, growing up in upstate New York, it was great. I mean, for me, I have no complaints about my childhood for the most part. But you're far enough away from New York City that it's not like an easy trip. So for the most part, it's kind of a suburban kind of lifestyle. And so for me, being interested in music and art and comics, and all of those things were either New York City or revolved around major cities. So for music, you had LA and San Francisco and Minneapolis, or even Boston for that matter. And when I was a teenager, my dream was, God, if I could ever be in a place where I could just go to any concert that I wanted to, or that back in the old days, the last page of Rolling Stone used to be a concert review, and it would always be something, exotic to me, like, hey, Buddy Guy at the Fillmore, or the Grateful Dead at the Warfield, things of that nature. And so I'd read about these and imagine what it would be like to see a show in those kind of places. And in Albany we had the Palace Theater, so I got to see some shows there, and of course Saratoga Performing Arts Center. But in addition to the music, the other thing I always wanted to be able to do was travel. And this sounds so silly, but when I was a kid, again, there was only 3 channels. This was even pre-cable. So there was a lot of reruns after school or during the day of older shows. And one of the shows that was always in reruns that I remember was a show called The Family Affair. And it revolved around a bachelor businessman who lived in a penthouse apartment in New York. He had a manservant who, you know, took care of the apartment and the shopping and things. And I don't remember if it was brother or his sister, but he somehow, they were killed in a car accident, and they had 3 children that he then was now responsible for. And the sitcom revolved around the kids trying to adjust to living with the bachelor, and the bachelor trying to adjust to living to the kids. But for me, what was so fascinating was that they lived in New York City in a high-rise. So every time they had to go to the park or wanted to go to a store or see a show or go to the movie, they would have to get in the elevator and go out, and there was a doorman and a desk, and it just seemed so glamorous to me. And I was always, so again, you know, I was like, if I ever get a chance to live in a big city in a high-rise, you know, that would be one of the dreams. So that was the teenage years. And then as I got into my 20s, you start to think about different things. So now, you know, I'm like, oh, you know, could I get a stable job, something that I can depend on? And, you know, I'd gotten out of college and accumulated some debt. And so in the 20s, the dream was, you know, to have a job that was good enough that I could, you know, buy my comics and go see some shows and not have to worry about debt. And transition into the 30s. And then you start thinking about, you know, maybe a stable relationship would be nice. And as I started to get into my 30s, I started to get the bug about kind of coming out to California. So I knew some people, some of my classmates had already made the jump out west. And at that time, my sister Erin had already moved out west. She was living in San Jose. So I decided to move out to California. Then as I get into my 40s, and now I'm starting to think, okay, maybe, you know, I think for me then at that point was now, okay, the dream is to have or to start a family, and, you know, to have a stable family life. And again, I'm not, you know, throwing stones or anything, but try to create an environment that had the best of what I had growing up, and then minimize the things that I'd rather not pass on. And now that I'm in my 50s, you know, I've done the traveling, I've seen the shows, I have a stable relationship, I have a family, and then I was like, wow, okay, so I think the dream would be now to work from home and just have like that stable family environment. And as I started to kind of roll back through some of the things, and this is where, if you're watching on the video, you'll get to see some of the pictures. And, you know, over the years here, you know, this is on top of a skyscraper in Sao Paulo. And up here is where this is the track where the window washer machine hangs over the side. And this was actually the building they used for RoboCop, the first RoboCop movie, for the evil, whatever the company was that was running the police department and built the RoboCops. So, you know, again, I got to travel to places I never thought about. Over here you see, this is comic book shopping in Switzerland, and they have a very different tradition for comics over there. They have what's called the BD tradition, and so the comics, if you will, it's still sequential art, but they come in a hardback, and a lot of them are either romance or scandalous, not pornographic, but, you know, scandalous, or if you're familiar with Asterix and Obelix, or even the Smurfs, come out of that whole tradition. As far as concerts, here's a goofy picture of me ushering a show at the Warfield. So I talked about this last week, which is over the years now, I think I've forgotten more shows than I remember. So if I go back to the teenage me and think about, my dream was to be able to go to shows and to live in a big city. So I moved to San Francisco, and I got to work at all these great venues and see so many shows over the years. Down here, these are pictures of me and my wife, and the one on the right here underneath me doing the airplane, this is actually at the Warfield in San Francisco, the same place the Usher picture's taken from, which is where we met, and that's actually the spot, although this is not our wedding picture, this is the spot where we got married. And then over here on the other bottom corner, again, is my wife, and that is when I was working down in San Diego, so we used to like to go out to PB, Pacific Beach, and it's a great little beach community there. And this was taken at Daddy-O's, obviously. I don't even know if that's there anymore. That picture has to me. God, look how young I was. Holy cow. Anyways, but again, with the dreams here. So here's an interesting story, upper right quadrant here. So I told the story about a family affair. And there was 3 kids that ended up being adopted by their bachelor uncle. And there was 2 younger kids, Buffy and Jody, and they were twins, a boy and a girl. And then there was an older teenage sister. Her name was Sissy. And she was still is very attractive. But her name's Cathy Garver. And after Family Affair, didn't really keep track of the people in the shows and stuff. But later on, as I started watching Spider-Man cartoons, I noticed that there was a familiar voice. And when I looked on the credits, I saw that Cathy Garver was now doing voice work for, for the Spider-Man and his friends cartoon. She was the voice of Firestar back in the 80s. And at a comic book convention, so my daughter there was, I think she was maybe 2, we actually got to meet Cathy Garver, and she and Parker have the same birthday. And every time there's a comic book show or a toy show, San Francisco, San Jose, kind of Oakland area, she's usually there, along with some of the other TV child stars from her generation, like Jerry Mathers from Leave It to Beaver, and some of the folks from Little House on the Prairie, and Tony Dowd. I think he's also from Leave It to Beaver. But anyways, super fun people, and she's actually you might see her. She's in commercials and Lifetime movies and such. There you can, at the bottom, you can see a picture of Chicago, and then me in my pink tie in Miami, and then Michael Fronte in Dublin, and then down at Dublin here, this is a Temple Bar in Dublin. And so, like I said, even here's Tom Petty, one of my heroes as a kid, and actually through adulthood, been able to go to sporting events. This is Giants, Pac Bell Park in San Francisco, and travel the world. So this is Barcelona, Spain, and then over here's Milan. And although not a frequent jet setter, have had on a few occasions to ride in a corporate jet. So again, not something I do on a regular basis. And because my work has me travel, I've been able to do some community things and meet people. So here you can see a Comic Geek Speak episode 300 photo from 2007. So this was at Golden Eagle Comics in Wassasoming, Pennsylvania. This was a podcast, still is a podcast. These guys are still at it. And I listen to it a lot. I still do, about comics, and just a bunch of guys that grew up reading comics, and they get together a couple times a week and talk about comics. So if you're into that, it's actually very entertaining. Got some other, I grabbed a couple of pictures, and this is really what made me, like, as I started off saying, realize that, like, holy cow, I think, God, my dreams have come true. So got a picture there, Scott Weiland, rest in peace, and Slash, from the Velvet Revolver days. That was pretty close for that show at the Warfield. And then there's Jar Jar Binks and Carbonite. And if you're wondering, Jar Jar Binks and Carbonite, like, when did that happen? It didn't happen in any of the movies, but one of our friends from the Comic Geek Speak community works at Industrial Light and Magic here in San Francisco on the Presidio, and back right after the first Iron Man movie came out, we had the opera. There was a Comic-Con in San Francisco, and Brian Deemer and some folks came out from the Comic Geek Speak community, and a few of us were able to get a kind of inside tour to Industrial Light and Magic. And outside one of the big main screening rooms, they have the Han Solo and Carbonite that was that the, I'm not a Star Wars geek, but I'm pretty sure that's the Empire Strikes Back. But the actual prop from the movie stands on one of the walls on the left, I believe it's the left-hand side, as you're walking into one of these giant screening theaters that they have in one of their buildings. And then on the right-hand side is this Jar Jar Binks and Carbonite. And the story goes that the crew really didn't understand or identify with the Jar Jar character. And once the movie was over, we're happy that hopefully they would never have to work with that character again. So they had one of the same size as the Han Solo and Carbonite of Jar Jar, and gave it to George Lucas as kind of a tongue-in-cheek gift at the end of at the wrap. And then down at the bottom there, again, I said I always wanted to travel, and I've had the opportunity. There you see some train station, and I believe that's France. And then the castle up on the hill there, I believe that is also France, if I'm not mistaken. I think that is outside of Lycée. So, to bring the first section together, so while COVID has done a lot of things to kind of make our lives difficult, there is some opportunities here to maybe slow down and reflect a little bit. And even just a little exercise tonight of just grabbing enough pictures to support what I was talking about, but not turn it into a brag fest or anything, was, again, just reinforce that, like, over the past 25, 30 years, I've been able to do almost or get to a place where everything that was on that list of dreams is now a reality. I do work from home. I do get to spend so much more time with my family now. I have been able to start a family. We have a cat. We have a dog. It's wonderful. So, I guess my message for everybody about all of this would be, maybe don't forget to notice what you have. Don't forget to notice what you have. Even though things seem tough right now, and again, I don't know what anybody else's pain is, and you don't know what mine may or may not be. But what we can do is try to lift people up. So that's actually a really good segue to our next topic here, which is social media. So for better or worse, it's a big part of all of our lives today. And I'm as guilty of being on social media as the next person, because obviously here I'm doing the podcast, and and a YouTube thing, as well as websites and all of that. So I have the Facebook accounts. But what I wanted to just kind of riff on for a little while is what I started to realize is the one thing that social media is not is actually social. And in my lifetime, the social media was, so when I was a kid, social media was talking and gossip in the neighborhood, in the church, in the supermarket, at the department store, at the Friendly's ice cream shop, at the car wash, at the Little League game. People would get together, and they would share their opinions face to face. They would look people in the eye. You would know where your neighbors were, where they came from, where their beliefs lined up, and within what is truly a social order, people had to figure out a way to coexist with all of the differences that were in the community. And part of that was helped by the fact that you had to look people in the eye. So you had to take time to listen. And in today's world, I don't know that people take, the social aspect seriously. And what I mean by social is, so if you're going to talk or gossip, you have to look somebody in the eye. You have to kind of own what you say. And pre-internet, and there was the telephone, so you could pick up, you could call people, you could talk to them. But again, you were identifiable, and in some respects, you could tell people not to spread or share what you were saying. But at the end of the day, you were still accountable for the words and for the things that you put out there. And even if you took the time to sit down and write a letter, you were actually creating a document, a record. So you were typically thoughtful and wrote in complete sentences and laid out ideas. And if you were making an argument or a case, with examples. So what it took effort and ownership. Okay. So yes, free speech. Yes, we can say and do things that other people in other parts of the world can't do. But what I would probably remind people is that social media is owned by companies. That's not necessarily First Amendment or free speech. You still have free speech, just even if you are thrown off Twitter or Facebook or don't use any of those. It doesn't keep that from happening. But what it does keep from happening is people taking ownership and putting effort into the things that they put out into the world. And now with social media, you're actually creating an electronic document of some of these things. So for me these days, it's super helpful to remember that what the internet isn't. Okay, we all know what it is. It's a lot of things. A lot of good things, a lot of bad things. But what it's not is the internet is not news. The internet is not news. Facebook is not news. And the internet does not love you. Okay? News comes from people. Okay? People sharing stories, accounts of things that happened in the world. Now, some of that happens via different types of media, but at the end of the day, news comes from people. It's not a meme, it's not a picture of somebody, it's not a bar graph, it's not a quote. Okay, this is not news. And the internet does not love you. So, sharing your pain on the internet is only going to bring more pain. So my advice and how I like to use social media, and even this tiny little platform here, is to actually be social. This is an effort to help me replace talking to people, having conversations. And more often than not, we're in the house, I'm in the house, and I don't I haven't been able to have those types of interactions. So this, for me, I'm trying to be social. So that's why I want to share some pictures. That's hopefully the things I talk about are in a way that lift people up, that empower people, or you or me, and spread a little happiness. Trust me, there's enough people and enough organizations and places to go for everything, for anything else that's negative or derogatory, that brings people down, that divides us. And I'm going to go back to this point about like sharing your pain on the internet. This is a dangerous thing. And in my opinion, that's, we are social creatures. And I'm not saying don't share your pain. I'm not saying don't talk to someone. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do those things. I'm just saying you should actually, again, take the time to connect with someone, find someone to actually have a conversation with, to look in the eye, to be able to establish some empathy with. The internet's not going to do any of that for you. And more often than not, there's people out there that look for people that are sharing their pain to only antagonize them more. And again, I'm not going to share any kind of examples around that because I don't want to get dragged into it, but I'm sure everyone can think of an example or two where people have put certain things out to the world only to be attacked endlessly. Now, there's enough media out there telling us why we're different and why we're all wrong and why everything is terrible. And I think a lot of that we used to be able to kind of brush off a little bit because we were able to unplug and actually go to a ball game or interact with some people or do something with our families, go out. And now a lot of that has been taken away. So this pandemic fatigue, it's real. So again, what's my point here? You got to figure out, you got to find some ways to feed your art and feed your heart. Because otherwise you're just going to get, if all you're doing to fill the void of time now is looking at social media, looking at what the internet has to say about X, Y, and Z, you're always going to be in a state of agitation for one reason or another. Somebody somewhere will do something that will antagonize a belief or something that you feel is right. And as long as you're looking into the magic box all the time, it will more than over deliver back exactly what you don't need. So that's what I have to say about social media. So I guess it's kind of a love-hate thing. So as long as you're going to put the love out there, I think it's a good thing. And maybe at times like this during the pandemic when we don't have the opportunities to look at each other and to sit across from a table or give each other a hug, that social media could take care of some of that. The hate part of the relationship speaks for itself. So anyways, that's my 2 cents on social media. All right, last but not least, another thing that came to me as I was driving with my daughter in the car. My car has a USB key in it, so typically what I do is load it up with music of all kinds of varieties, old and new, some of it even my daughter's, and we just put it on random shuffle, and every time we get in the car to go somewhere, you never know what's going to come up. And I want to say about a month ago, I bought from iTunes not the complete collection, but like a box set, if you will, from Croce. And Croce is an artist that I know from all the way back as young as I can remember, because it was music that was played in my house when I was a kid. And the songs were catchy. They were also on the radio, and he was on the different TV shows at the time, your Merv Griffins, your Mike Douglas, your Dinah Shores, your different, music shows that were on TV at the time. But tragically, he was killed in a plane crash and left us far too early. But His songs were of the singer-songwriter variety, typically pretty catchy, and he did have a couple of hits in his short career with us. And one of those songs came on, and again, I know every single word to almost every Jim Croce song. And my daughter was looking at me, and she's like, how do you know? Like, first of all, who is that? And because he kind of sounds like a gruffy Ed Sheeran, and I was like, pretty okay. That's kind of I can hear that, but maybe Ed Sheeran got some of that from the singer-songwriter tradition, which Jim Croce was part of. And then I started to tell her about my association with the music. So again, I'm not here to share pain, but for me, Jim Croce, when Jim Croce music was playing in my house, those were good times. Those were the times when my dad was at his best, when he was happy, when he was sharing and laughing and just being generally kind of a fun guy to be around. And he played that music a lot. And so as a result, when you're a kid and you hear things over and over again, they stick with you. And I went through a long period of my life where I was, angry and upset with my dad, and all the way up until, even to his passing. And what I started to realize was that, because now that I'm in my 50s and have experienced some of the things that, you gotta be careful about how you judge, and especially not having lived the life. Plus, as people, you tend to remember, or we do remember, a lot more of the bad things than we do the good things. Believe it or not. So what I was thinking about was, well, what kind of legacy am I leaving, for Parker? And I wanted to share with her, but not overshare. I don't want to burden her with the stuff that I had to carry, but at the same time, I wanted her to know that when that music came on, that was me thinking about me being free enough to remember good stuff about my dad and growing up, and all of the other stuff that came later was kind of out of the way for the 2.5, 3.5 minutes that a Jim Croce song was on. And I was like, wow, that was, it's kind of powerful. And I started to think about, well, now, again, as a legacy, my dad didn't share a whole lot of like his life and like what he did or what his journey was. And I guess by the time I was old enough for him to start sharing that stuff, I was so angry that I wasn't talking to him. So now I get stuck with, okay, so now how do I string together my story in such a way that that it's authentic and I share enough of it, but at the same time I don't overshare. And the other thing that's hard is, at least for me, on from a parenting side, I have my mom to look to and my grandmother, but on my dad and my grandfather's side, I knew my grandfather. He was a nice enough guy, but not really an influence on me. And the same with my grandmother on my dad's side. And again, same thing with my dad. I had to figure out a lot of stuff on my own. And for me anyways, once I got to high school, I was very fortunate in that I had a music teacher and an art teacher who kind of helped take on that role of making sure I was focused in the right direction. And then I went into the military. So that created a very interesting person. And I kind of call those, maybe that's like the late teens, early 20s, kind of the Fight Club years, right? So after getting out of the military, what was now created was kind of a really organized and motivated screw up. So, but I came back, went to college, started to get my degree done, had a couple of failed relationships, Fortunately, no kids, so we didn't have to worry about that. But did get the degree, so now I'm an educated, organized, highly motivated screw-up who's bad at relationships and kind of self-centered. So now we move into the emo years. And it wasn't until I want to say maybe the last 15 years, now we hit the grown-up years. So that's where my job changed from a job to a career, and having a stable marriage and a daughter and a dog and a cat and the ability to feed my art and express myself, and still with relationships and friends that I've had all the way back to junior high school, and actually some a little bit further. Jeff Barnes and Christine Mastriani from Shaker both came, or I knew Jeff all the way back to Sky Farm, which was a Methodist summer camp. So that's all the way back to elementary school. And then Christine Mastriani was also from Schenectady and moved to Latham and went to Shaker at the same time that my sister and I did. So we knew her as well. But all of that was, thankfully, up until recently, built on taking the time to talk to people, to build relationships, and to nurture those relationships over the years. So, which I guess in a way brings us all the way back around full circle to kind of where we started from, which is, I think we all need to spend a little more time being social to actually have the conversations. Instead of, if you have a political view or something that you want to share with me, reach out to me on Messenger, hit me on an email, pick up the phone and call. But I don't know that it's in everybody's best interest that we do all that kind of stuff out in the world. I would rather we get together and we share what's great and what makes all of us. So that's it for this Sunday. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back next week with another episode of Left Coast Love 2020. Thank you.